Chapter 2 of Umbrellas and Their History. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leon Meyer. Umbrellas and Their History by William Sangster. Chapter 2. The Ancient History of the Umbrella. The umbrella is derived from a stately family, that of the parasol. The legitimate use of the umbrella, though sufficiently obvious, being almost ignored in those countries whence it derives its being, since it was as a protection against the scorching heat of the sun that it was first used. The parasol then, or umbrella, since for all practical purposes the two are really identical, dates from the earliest ages, some commentators on the Bible fancying that they can discover it in places where a shade protecting from the sun is mentioned. This is not unlikely, but it is certain that the parasol has been in use from a very early period. Chinese history goes a very long way back, inasmuch as it places the invention of those elegant machines many thousand years anterior to the Mosaic date of the world's creation. Their antiquity among the Hindus is more satisfactorily proved by the following passage from the dramatic poem of the Shakuntala, the date of which is supposed to be the 6th century of the Christian era. Quote, "The cares of supporting the nation harass the sovereign, while he is cheered with a view of the people's welfare, as a huge umbrella, of which a man bears the staff in his own hand, fatigues while it shades him. The sovereign, like a branching tree, bears on his head the scorching sunbeams, while the broad shade allays the fever of those who seek shelter under him." Unquote. The origin of the parasol is wrapped in considerable obscurity. Some profound investigators have supposed that large leaves tied to the branching extremities of a bough suggested the first idea of the invention. Others assert that the idea was probably derived from the tent, which remains in form unaltered to the present day. Dr. Morrison, however, tells us that the tradition existing in China is that the san, which signifies a shade for sun and rain, originated in standards and banners waving in the air. As this is a case in which we may quote the line, "Who shall decide when doctors disagree?" we may with safety assume that all are in the right, and that the parasol owed its origin to all or any of the above-mentioned fortuitous circumstances. In the Ninevite scriptures, the umbrella or parasol appears frequently. Layard gives a picture of the bas-relief representing a king in his chariot, with an attendant holding an umbrella over his head. It has a curtain hanging down behind, but is otherwise exactly like those in use at the present time, the stretchers and sliding runner being plainly represented. To quote the words of that indefatigable traveler, quote, "The umbrella or parasol, the emblem of royalty so universally accepted by Eastern nations, was generally carried over the king in time of peace, and sometimes even in time of war. In shape it resembled very closely those in common use, but it is always open in the sculptures. It was edged with tassels, and was usually ornamented at the top by a flower or some other ornament. On the later bas-reliefs, a long piece of embroidered linen or silk falling from one side like a curtain appears to screen the king completely from the sun. The parasol was reserved exclusively for the monarch, and is never represented as borne over any other person." Unquote. In Egypt, again, the parasol is found in various shapes. In some instances it is depicted as a flabellum, a fan of palm leaves or colored feathers, fixed on a long handle, resembling those now carried behind the Pope in processions. Sir Gardner Wilkinson, in his work on Egypt, has an engraving of an Ethiopian princess traveling through Upper Egypt in a chariot. A kind of umbrella fastened to a stout pole rises in the center, bearing a close affinity to what are now termed chase umbrellas. To judge from Wilkinson's account, the umbrella was generally used throughout Egypt, partly as a mark of distinction, but more on account of its useful than its ornamental qualities. The same author is rather doubtful whether, in the picture given by him of a military chief in his chariot, the frame which an attendant holds up behind the rider is a shield or a screen, but the latter is the more probable supposition, as it has all the appearance of an umbrella without the usual handle. In some paintings on a temple wall, an umbrella is held over the figure of a god, carried in procession, and altogether we may, perhaps, consider it decided, beyond dispute, that the umbrella in its modern shape was used in Egypt. Footnote: to silence captious critics, who may find fault with the designs of our artist, we may once for all remark that an idealized conception of the figures only is given. The style of the ancient draughtsmen was by no means so perfect that we, who live in a more civilized age, should be entirely fettered by their conceptions, and the records of ancient life are not nearly full enough to justify anyone who may assert that the pictures in our pages are not so accurate as those in the British Museum. Anyhow, what they ought to have been, rather than what the ancients were, our artist has striven to delineate. In Persia, the parasol is repeatedly found in the carved work of Persepolis, and Sir John Malcolm has an article on the subject in his History of Persia. In some sculptures, of a very Egyptian character by the way, the figure of a king appears attended by a slave, who carries over his head an umbrella, with stretchers and runner complete. In other sculptures on the rock at Tak-i-Bostan, supposed to be not less than 12 centuries old, a deer hunt is represented, at which a king looks on, seated on a horse, and having an umbrella borne over his head by an attendant. This combination of business and comfort forcibly reminds us of a certain wet day in Karlsruhe, where we witnessed from the window of the Hôtel d'Angleterre a stout, martial-looking National Guardsman marching to the exercising ground with an umbrella over his head, and a maid-servant diligently tramping through the mud behind him, bearing his musket. As in Assyria, so in most other Eastern countries, this use of the parasol carried with it a peculiar and honorable significance. The tradition relating to its origin in China has already been alluded to, and we can trace notices of its use a very long way back indeed. According to Dr. Morrison, umbrellas and parasols are referred to in books printed about AD 300, but their use has been traced still further back than this. A very ancient book of Chinese ceremonies, called Chiao Li, or the Rites of Chiao, directs that upon the imperial cars the dais should be placed. Quote, the figure of this dais, contained in the Chinese edition of Chiao Li, and the particular description of it given in the explanatory commentary of Lin He Yi, both identify it with an umbrella. The latter describes the dais to be composed of 28 arcs, which are equivalent to the whalebone ribs of the modern instrument, and the staff supporting the covering to consist of 2 parts, the upper being a rod 3/18 of a Chinese foot in circumference, and the lower a tube 6/10 in circumference, into which the upper half is capable of sliding." Unquote. In the second Tartar invasion of China, the emperor's son was taken prisoner by the Tartar chief, and made to carry his umbrella when he went out hunting. Starting from royal significance attached to the umbrella, came a feeling of veneration for it, very different from the contempt with which we are nowadays too apt to regard it. It was represented by many ancient nations as shading their gods. In the Hindu mythology, Vishnu is said to have paid a visit to the infernal regions with his umbrella over his head. One would think that in few places could an umbrella have been less appropriate, but doubtless Vishnu knew what he was about, and had his own reasons for carrying his parapluie under his arm. Perhaps, like Mrs. Gamp, he could not be separated from it. So much for the ancient history of our subject in the East. We may now go on to countries about which we know a little more than of ancient China and Assyria. In Greece, as Becker tells us in his Charicles, the parasol was an indispensable adjunct to a lady of fashion. It had also its religious signification. In the Scurophoria, the feast of Athene Skyris, a white parasol was borne by the priestesses of the goddess from the Acropolis to the Phileris. In the feasts of Dionysius, in that at Elea in Arcadia, where he was exposed under an umbrella, and elsewhere, the umbrella was used, and in an old bas-relief the same god is represented as descending ad inferos, with a small umbrella in his hand, like Vishnu before mentioned. There was also another festival in which they appeared, though without any mystical signification. In the Panathenaea, the daughters of the Metceci, or foreign residents, carried parasols over the heads of Athenian women as a mark of inferiority. Tas Parthenons, ton metoikon, skiadiphorion, in teas rompeas enonkezon. Oelian, vh. 6:1. Footnote: They compelled the maidens of the Metceci to act as umbrella bearers in the processions. Its use seems to have been confined to women. In Pausanias there is a description of a tomb near Phari, a Greek city. On the tomb was the figure of a woman. Themapaina de auti prosestiki skiadion pharusa. Pausanias, Book 7, Caption 22, Section 6. Footnote: And by her stood a female slave, bearing a parasol. Aristophanes seems to mention it among the common articles of female use. Imen men garson, ita kai nun tantion, o canon, oi kalathiokoi, to skiadion. Aristophanes, Thesmophoria Zeusi, 821. Footnote: For now our loom is safe, our weaving beam, our baskets and umbrella. It occurs frequently on vases, and is in shape like that now used. It could be put up and down. Ta dotagon son, ni al, exceptenuto osper skiadion, kai palin zunagito. Aristophanes, Equities, 1347. Footnote: But your ears, by Jove, are stretched out like a parasol, and now again shut up. Which the scholiast explains: Ektinatai de kai, systolatai prostone, katapagonta chiron. Footnote: Are opened and shut as need requires. For a man to carry one was considered a mark of effeminacy, as appears from the following fragment of Anacreon: Skiadeskian elephantinin phori gunaixin autos. Athanasius, Book 12, Caption 46, Section 534. Footnote: He carries an ivory parasol, as women do. Plutarch makes Aristides speak of Xerxes as sitting under a canopy or umbrella looking at the sea fight. Cathienos hupt skiaidi chrysi. Plutarch, Thermopylae, chapter 16, page 120. Footnote: Sitting under a golden canopy. And of Cleopatra in like manner. Upo skiadi chrysopasto. Plutarch, Antony, chapter 26, page 927. Footnote: Under a gold-wrought canopy. From Greece it is probable that the use of the parasol passed to Rome, where it seems to have been commonly used by women, while it was the custom even for effeminate men to defend themselves from the heat by the means of the umbraculum, formed of skin or leather, and capable of being lowered at will. We find frequent reference to the umbrella in the Roman classics, and it appears that it was, not unlikely, a post of honor among maidservants to bear it over their mistresses. Allusions to it are tolerably frequent in the poets. Virgil's Munamen ad imbres, footnote, a shelter for the shower, probably has nothing to do with umbrellas, but more definite mention of them is not wanting. Ovid speaks of Hercules carrying the parasol of Omphale. Aurea pelabant rapidos umbracula soles, cui tamen Herculei sustinuere manus. Ovid, Fasti, Book 2, 131I. Footnote: A golden umbrella warded off the keen sun, which even the hands of Hercules have borne. Martial speaks of a servant carrying the parasol. Umbelam lusca, ligda feras domini. Martial, Book 11, chapter 73. Footnote: Mayest thou, Ligda, be parasol carrier for a public mistress. Juvenal mentions an umbrella as a present. In cui tu veridem umbellam cui sucina mittas. Juvenal 9:50. Footnote: See to whom it is sent a green umbrella and amber ornaments. Ovid advises a lover to make himself agreeable by holding his mistress's parasol. Ipsi tenedestinta suis umbracula virgis. Ovid, Ars Amatoria, 2:209. Footnote: Yourself hold up the umbrella spread out by its rods. This shows that the umbrella was of much the same construction as ours. A very common use for it was in the theatre, whenever, from wind or other cause, the velarium, or huge awning stretched over the building, always open to the air, could not be put up. Accipi quae nimios vincant, umbracula soles, sit licet et fentes tet tua vela tegant. Martial, Book 14, Epigram 28. Footnote: Take this, which may shield you from the sun's excessive rays. So may your own sail shield you, even should the breeze blow. By tua vela is to be understood your own umbrella, and elsewhere the same writer gives the advice: Ingrediare viam coelo, licet usque sereno, ad subitas nunquam scortia desit aquas. Martial, Book 14, Epigram 130. Footnote: Though with a bright sky you begin your journey, let this cloak ever be at hand in case of unexpected showers. It will be noticed from the above extracts that the umbrella does not appear to have been used among the Romans as a defense from rain, and this is curious enough, for we know that the theatres were protected by the velarium, or awning, which was drawn across the arena whenever a sudden shower came on. Strange that this self-evident application of the umbrella should not have occurred to a nation generally so ingenious in the invention of every possible luxury. Possibly the expense bestowed in the decoration of the umbraculum was a reason for its not being applied to what we cannot but regard as its legitimate use. After the founding of Constantinople, the custom of great people carrying an umbrella seems to have arisen, but in Rome it appears only to have been used as a luxury, never as a mark of distinction. Pliny speaks of umbrellas made of palm leaves, but from other sources we may gather that the Romans, at all events in the days of the empire, lavished as much splendor on their umbrella as on all articles of their dress. Ovid, as above quoted, speaks of an umbrella inwrought with gold, and Claudian in the same way has Nea defensura calorum, aurea submoviant rapidos umbracula soles. Claudian, Book 8, De Quarto Consulato Honorii, 1, 340. Footnote: Nor to protect you from the heat, let the golden umbrella ward off the keen sun's rays. From this we may conclude that the carrying an umbrella was in some sort a mark of effeminacy. In another place, carrying the umbrella is alluded to as one of the duties of a slave. Jam non umbracula tollunt virginibus, etc. Footnote: Now they do not carry girls' parasols. Gorius says that the umbrella came to Rome from the Etruscans, and certainly it appears not infrequently on Etruscan vases, as also on later gems. One gem, figured by Pacudius, shows an umbrella with a bent handle, sloping backwards. Strabo describes a sort of screen, or umbrella, worn by Spanish women, but this is not like a modern umbrella. Very many curious facts are connected with the use of the umbrella throughout the East, where it was nearly everywhere one of the insignia of royalty, or at least of high rank. Monsieur de la Louberet, who was envoy extraordinaire from the French king to the king of Siam in 1687 and 1688, wrote an account entitled A New Historical Relation of the Kingdom of Siam, which was translated in 1693 into English. According to his account, the use of the umbrella was granted to some only of the subjects by the king. An umbrella with several circles, as if 2 or 3 umbrellas were fastened on the same stick, was permitted to the king alone. The nobles carried a single umbrella, with painted cloths hanging from it. The Talapoins, who seem to have been a sort of Siamese monks, had umbrellas made of palm leaf, cut and folded, so that the stem formed a handle. The same writer describes the audience chambers of the king of Siam. In his quaint old French he says, Pour tout meubler, il n'y a qu'à 3 parasols, un devant la fenêtre à 9 ronds, à 2 à 7 ronds aux 2 côtés de la fenêtre. Le parasol est in ce palais, sécladé et un seul aussi. Tavernier, in his Voyage to the East, says that on each side of the Mogul's throne were 2 umbrellas, and also describes the hall of the king of Ava as decorated with an umbrella. The Maratha princes, who reigned at Poona and Satara, had the title of Shahatrapati, Lord of the Umbrella. Shahatra, or Shata, has been suggested as the derivation of satrapies, ex-satrapies in Theopompus, and it seems a probable derivation enough. The chata of the Indian and Burmese princes is large and heavy, and requires a special attendant, who has a regular position in the royal household. In Ava it seems to have been part of the king's title, that he was King of the White Elephant and Lord of the 24 Umbrellas. Persons of rank in the Maratha court, who were not permitted the right of carrying an umbrella, used a screen, a flat vertical disc called abjir, carried by an attendant. Even now the umbrella has not lost its emblematic meaning. In 1855 the King of Burma directed a letter to the Marquis of Dalhousie, in which he styles himself, "His great, glorious, and most excellent Majesty, who reigns over the kingdoms of Thunaparanta, Tampadipa, and all the great umbrella-wearing chiefs of the eastern countries," etc. Thus we see that the same signification which was attached to the umbrella by the ancient people of Nineveh still remains connected with it even in our own time. In the Great Exhibition of 1851 was the splendid umbrella belonging to His Highness the Maharaja of Nagpur. The ribs and stretchers, 16 in number, divided the umbrella into as many segments, covered with silk, exquisitely embroidered with gold and silver ornaments. The upper part of the design was complete in each department, but at the lower it was formed into a graceful running border, to which a fringe was attached. The handle was hollow and formed of thick silver plates. In Bengal it appears that no distinction is attached to the umbrella, since the poorer classes there use a chata, or small umbrella, made of leaves of the Licerata peltata. These are of conical form, and have numerous ribs and stretchers. The higher class in Assam use a similar umbrella. In China the use of the umbrella does not appear to have been confined, as in India and Persia, to royalty, but it was always, as it is now, a mark of high rank, though not exclusively so. There seems to have been no particular rule about it, but it carried with it some peculiar distinction, for, on one occasion at least, we hear of 24 umbrellas being carried before the emperor when he went out hunting. Here it is, what it appears to be in no other eastern country, a defense against rain rather than sun, and while the richer people do not go out much while it is wet, the poorer classes wear a dress that protects them from the weather. In the rainy season, for instance, a Chinese boatman wears a coat of straw, and a hat of straw and bamboo. Such a dress, of course, renders an umbrella superfluous, and it matters little to the wearer how hard the rain may pelt. Nevertheless, great numbers of umbrellas are exported from China to India, the Indian archipelago, and even South America. In the 1851 exhibition 2 only were shown. Of them the report says, "They present nothing remarkable beyond the great number of ribs, which amount to 42. The ribs are formed of wood, and instead of being embraced by the fork of the stretcher, as in the case of European umbrellas, they have a groove cut out in the middle of their lengths, into which the stretcher is secured by a stud of wood. The head of each rib fits into a notch formed in the ring of wood, which is fastened onto the top of the stick, there being a separate notch for each rib. The slide is of wood, and has 42 notches, namely one for each stretcher, which, like the ribs, is formed of wood. The covering of the umbrellas exhibited is of oil paper coarsely painted." But the use of the umbrella traveled westward, and with it the custom of regarding it as a mark of dignity. Amongst the Arabs the umbrella was a mark of distinction. Niebuhr, who traveled in southern Arabia, describes a procession of the Iman of Sana. In it the Iman, and each of the princes of his numerous family, caused a madalla, or large umbrella, to be carried by his side, and it is a privilege which, in this country, is appropriated to princes of the blood, just as the Sultan of Constantinople permits none but his vizier to have his caïque, or gondola, covered behind, to keep him from the heat of the sun. The same writer goes on to say that many independent chiefs of Yemen carried madallas as a mark of their independence. In Morocco, according to a passage quoted by a writer in the Penny magazine from the Travels of Ali Bey, the emperor alone and his family are allowed to use it. "The retinue of the Sultan was composed of a troop of from 15 to 20 men on horseback. About 100 steps behind them came the Sultan, who was mounted on a mule with an officer bearing his umbrella, who rode by his side also on a mule. The umbrella is a distinguishing sign of the sovereign of Morocco. Nobody but himself, his sons, or his brothers dare to make use of it." Unquote. In Turkey the umbrella is common. A vestige of the reverence once attached to it remains in the custom of compelling everybody who passes the palace where the Sultan is residing to lower his umbrella as a mark of respect. And, at all events some years back, before the Crimean War had introduced so many Europeans to Constantinople, anyone neglecting to pay the required reverence stood in considerable danger of a lively reminder from the sentry on duty. Before concluding this chapter, it may not be out of place to make a few remarks as to the origin of the word umbrella, as we have done regarding the thing itself. The English name is borrowed from the Italian ombrella. The Latin term umbella is applied by botanists to those blossoms which are clustered at the extremities of several spokes, radiating from the common stem like the metallic props of the umbrella. The name, as is seen, does not give the slightest idea of the use of the article designated, as is often the case with words we practical folk employ. And we might well take a lesson from our cousins German or French, who have invented distinct names for the weapon used to ward off the rays of the sun, and that employed against rain, namely, Regenschirm, Parapluie, Sonnenschirm, Parasol. These are better than our names, even though both the French words labor under the disadvantage of being hybrids, half Greek and half Latin. Such, then, is the ancient history of the umbrella, as far as our research has enabled us to trace it, and, indeed, we are now not a little surprised at the result of those labors which have enabled us to discover so much. End of chapter 2.